In the wake of World War II, Europe found itself divided and scarred, grappling with the aftermath of a devastating conflict. The echoes of warfare had barely died down when the continent was carved into two distinct spheres of influence. The victorious powers of the East and West, each with their own ideologies, staked their territories, giving birth to a new kind of confrontation, the Cold War. The Soviet Union, under the iron-fisted rule of Joseph Stalin, imposed its communist ideology on the nations of Eastern Europe, creating what would be known as the Eastern Bloc. Countries like Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia became Soviet satellites, their governments and economies shaped in the image of Moscow's ideals. To the west, the United States and its allies sought to counter Soviet influence, championing democracy and capitalism. The Marshall Plan, an economic aid package of unprecedented scale, was initiated to help rebuild war-torn Western Europe and prevent the spread of communism. Between these two blocs rose an invisible yet impenetrable barrier, the Iron Curtain, a term famously coined by Winston Churchill. It was not just a physical division marked by walls and fences, but a symbolic one that separated two very different ways of life, two divergent paths of progress and development. The impact of this division was profound and far-reaching. It reshaped the political landscape of Europe, setting the stage for decades of tension, competition, and the constant threat of nuclear warfare. The European population, still reeling from the horrors of war, now had to navigate this new reality, living under the shadow of the mushroom cloud. This period also witnessed the birth of new alliances and organizations, such as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the United Nations, which would play crucial roles in maintaining some semblance of balance and preventing another global conflict. As the dust of World War II settled, a new era began, marked by the division of Europe and the start of the Cold War. In the East, the grip of Stalin's regime was tightening, reshaping the region and its countries. This was a time of dramatic transformation, as Stalin sought to extend his influence and the Soviet model across Eastern Europe. Under Stalin, the Sovietization of Eastern Europe was swift and far-reaching. Countries like Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia were drawn into the Soviet sphere of influence, their political and economic systems reshaped along Soviet lines. The process was often brutal, characterized by purges, forced collectivization and political repression. But it was also a time of unprecedented social and economic change as the industrial and agricultural sectors were modernized and expanded. One of the pivotal moments of this era was the Prague coup in 1948. This was a decisive moment in the Cold War, as Czechoslovakia, once considered one of the most democratic and Western-oriented countries in Eastern Europe, fell under communist control. The coup was a stark demonstration of the power of the Soviet Union and the fragility of democracy in the face of Soviet expansion. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of this era was the Iron Curtain, a term famously used by Winston Churchill in 1946 to describe the dividing line between the democratic West and the communist East. The Iron Curtain was more than just a metaphor. It was a physical reality, marked by walls, fences and watchtowers. It was a stark reminder of the division of Europe and the world during the Cold War. Stalin's policies had a profound impact on the people and politics of Eastern Europe. They undermined traditional social structures, disrupted economic life, and led to widespread human rights abuses. But they also laid the groundwork for a new kind of society, one that was shaped by the values and ideals of the Soviet Union. Stalin's rule left an indelible mark on Eastern Europe, setting the stage for profound changes in the decades to come. The legacy of this era continues to influence the region today as countries grapple with the challenges of transition and the shadows of the past. While Eastern Europe was under the Soviet thumb, the West was charting a different course. The year was 1948, and the city of Berlin found itself at the heart of an international crisis. The Soviet Union, aiming to force the Western Allies out of Berlin, initiated a blockade, cutting off all land and water routes to the city. The Western Allies, however, responded with the Berlin airlift, supplying the city from above and proving their commitment to their sectors. Amidst this tension, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed in 1949. This collective defense alliance, including the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations, aimed to deter Soviet aggression, marking a significant stride in Western unity. Around the same time, the Marshall Plan was being implemented. Named after US Secretary of State George Marshall, this economic aid package was designed to rebuild war-torn European economies and prevent the spread of communism. Billions of dollars flowed into Europe, fostering economic recovery and stability. In 1950, Western Europe made a landmark move towards further integration with the establishment of the European Coal and Steel Community. This organization, including France, West Germany, Italy, and the Benelux countries, aimed to regulate and unify coal and steel production, the very industries that powered war machines. This move was a profound commitment to peace and cooperation. This spirit of unity continued, culminating in the Treaty of Rome in 1957. This treaty established the European Economic Community, the precursor to today's European Union. It aimed to create a common market and customs union among its 6 founding members, setting the stage for an era of unprecedented economic integration. These pivotal events laid the foundation for what would become the European Union, shaping the trajectory of Western Europe. As we'll see, while the East was in the grip of communism, the West was moving towards unity and prosperity, setting the stage for the Europe we know today. As the Cold War persisted, so too did the struggle for freedom and change in Eastern Europe. The mid-20th century was a time of great turmoil and resistance. In 1956, Hungary and Poland staged uprisings against Soviet control. The Hungarian Revolution was brutally suppressed by Soviet forces, but it was a stark reminder of the simmering discontent beneath the surface of the Eastern Bloc. Around the same time, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev initiated a period known as the Thaw, Coexistence Pacifique. This was a time of relative liberalization and de-Stalinization, where censorship was lessened and there was a slight relaxation of political repression. However, this did not mean the end of the cold tensions. In 1961, the physical embodiment of these tensions came to fruition with the construction of the Berlin Wall, a grim reminder of the stark divide between East and West. The wall was more than just a physical barrier. It was a powerful symbol of the ideological chasm that split the world during this period. In the late 1960s, Soviet leadership passed to Leonid, who introduced the Brezhnev Doctrine. This policy justified the Soviet Union's right to intervene in the affairs of communist countries to strengthen communism. It was under this doctrine that the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, effectively ending the Prague Spring. The Prague Spring was a brief period of political liberalization in Czechoslovakia, where reforms were introduced to create socialism with a human face. However, the Soviet Union saw this as a threat to its control and swiftly intervened to halt these changes. Despite the challenges, the people of Eastern Europe continued to strive for freedom, setting the stage for the eventual collapse of the Iron Curtain. The final chapters of the Cold War saw the collapse of the Eastern Bloc and the expansion of the European community. As the 80s unfurled, a series of seismic shifts began to reshape the European landscape. The Berlin Wall, an enduring symbol division, fell in November 1989. This momentous event signified not just the end of a physical barrier, but the crumbling of an ideological one as well. It set the stage for the reunification of Germany, marking the beginning of the end for the Cold War. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev introduced policies of glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, or restructuring. These reforms, while intended to revive the Soviet economy, inadvertently led to the dissolution of the USSR. The once mighty Soviet Union officially ceased to exist on December 26, 1991. At the same time, Eastern Europe was witnessing a wave of democratic revolutions. The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, the peaceful transition in the overthrow of Ceausescu in Romania, and the Solidarity movement in Poland all marked the end of communist rule in their respective countries. These peaceful transitions to democracy heralded a new era for Eastern Europe. All these countries strive to meet the Copenhagen criteria, the rules that define whether a country is eligible to join the European Union. This includes having a stable democratic government, a functioning market economy, and the acceptance of the obligations of membership, including adherence to EU law. Parallel to these upheavals, the European community was on a path of expansion. The Treaty of Maastricht, signed in February 1992, transformed the European community into the European Union. The EU then embarked on a significant enlargement process, welcoming the aspirational and now eligible countries from the former Eastern Bloc as new members. These profound changes marked a shift from a divided continent towards a more integrated Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the dissolution of the USSR, the democratic revolutions in Eastern Europe, and the enlargement of the EU all played pivotal roles in shaping the Europe we know today. The end of the Cold War marked a new beginning for Europe, one of unity and cooperation, but the legacy of the past continues to shape its present and future. Let's take a moment to step back and recap the major events we've discussed to truly understand the journey Europe has been on. We began in the ashes of World War II, where a devastated Europe was divided, with the Iron Curtain acting as a stark separator between Western and Eastern Europe. We moved on to the Stalin era, where the USSR's influence extended across the Eastern Bloc, cementing the division. The Prague coup in 1948 further solidified the Iron Curtain, marking a clear line between the democratic West and the communist East. Then we delved into the period of the Berlin blockade and the formation of NATO. The Berlin airlift, an incredible feat of international cooperation, symbolized the West's determination to resist Soviet expansion. Meanwhile, the Marshall Plan was instrumental in rebuilding Western Europe and deterring the spread of communism. We then traversed the period of thaw, marked by the Hungary and Poland uprisings, which challenged Soviet control. Amidst this, the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 served as a stark reminder of the deep divisions that still existed within Europe. And finally, we witnessed the monumental shift with the fall of the Berlin Wall, a symbol of hope and change. The Soviet Union, under Gorbachev's leadership, introduced glasnost and perestroika, policies that inadvertently led to the dissolution of the USSR. Meanwhile, the EU expanded, welcoming many former Eastern Bloc countries as new members. These events, from the aftermath of the Second World War to the end of the Cold War, have shaped the Europe we know today. A continent once marked by division and conflict, Europe has transformed into a symbol of unity and cooperation. Yet the legacy of its past continues to influence its present and future, reminding us of the resilience and courage it